Welcome back, Timeline. I'm your host, Tania, and this is the most interesting people on my timeline, a series and archive dedicated to exploring the digital space and how it affects the lives and work of my most interesting online friends. If you're new here, welcome. On this podcast, we talk about the internet space, creative and professional processes, but most importantly, we talk about it with interesting people in various fields who I've had the pleasure of engaging with online and IRL. If you're not new here, you know this is the season finale of the musical Sonic Slay season. You also know that this is the most consistent I've ever been with uploads, doing it almost every week. And I don't know if you know, but I am very grateful to everyone for listening and for supporting the podcast. And once again, the commentary portion doesn't have a visual component this time because I'm out and about without my setup. But again, it doesn't matter because the interview is the star of the show. As always, you can listen to all episodes anywhere you get your podcasts, as well as watch a visual version on Spotify and YouTube. You can find links to all of this and more in the description box of whatever platform you're listening on, but also make sure to visit taniadoes.com/interesting people for bonus content, including a playlist of my favorite songs from this season's guests. As mentioned before, this is the season finale for season 3, which I refer to as the Sonic Slay season because all our guests are successfully slaying in the music business. Today's episode features New York City-based creative Brad Watson. You can find more info and links to Brad's work in the description box or on taniadoes.com/Spinach Gang. Welcome to this episode of the most interesting people on my timeline. Let me introduce you to Brad.
My name is Brad Watson. I'm the CEO and founder of Spinach Records. Music is very tethered to my identity. It's something that I can't live without. I spend a lot of hours in the morning and at night just sifting for new samples, new sounds, buying vinyl, occasionally sharing snippets of unreleased songs with friends and family. But I would not be where I am today without music in my life.
Yeah, and so the reason I reached out to you was mainly because of your record company and Spinach Records. So could you talk a little bit about Spinach and how it came around? I always love hearing like the origin story of the name as well.
Yeah. So Spinach originally started out as a creative collective back in 2017 with a few friends from New Hampshire, Atlanta, Virginia, and myself. We were all just getting our feet wet in the creative space, not really sure where we wanted to land our feet. But a couple of us were videographers, some of us were musicians, some of us were just jack of all trades, for lack of a better word, and spent a lot of time really nurturing each other's creativity, challenging each other's ways of thinking. And eventually those relationships strengthened and we made t-shirts, sold those around campus at Harvard. And that built up like a very niche following of people that wanted to be in community with us, that wanted to like grow and discover where their creativity would go. So after making those shirts, there was a little bit of a demand bubble that formed. So we were sort of tasked with either making one round of shirts and never talking about it again, or making a second, third, fourth batch of Spinach shirts and just seeing where it goes. And we went down that second path and never really looked back. After making those shirts, we did it was like a supreme interpolation. So the italic sort of tilted font, just without saying Supreme, it would say Spinach on it. And the second shirt that we dropped was actually a Barack Obama collage shirt. And I think a lot of people found it funny. They found it interesting and just wanted to, engage with it. It was a good conversation starter. So from there, we started working with a lot of musicians in the Boston, New York, DC area. And we realized we had more direct contact with these musicians than most record labels did. We already had the equipment, the personnel, and the clientele to really outperform some of these smaller and medium-sized record labels. So before we even knew what we were building, there was the original ideation of a record label came in 2019. So we filed the paperwork in 2019, and that is what Spinach came to be. The idea being, photographers and videographers don't get respected when it comes to compensation, when it comes to equitable jobs. And we also realize, the opposite side of the spectrum is musicians are not being taken care of. They're not being respected. Their time is being wasted. So I really spent a lot of time between the pandemic and now trying to tackle that issue, putting a large emphasis on mental health and wellness and holistic wellness. And that's birthed a very self-sustaining ecosystem that can be around for the next 15, 20 years.
Yeah, that's also something that I really was interested in talking about within the creative space that you've created, is that it's wellness centered. But could you talk about a little bit of what that means and how y'all implement that wellness with your artists and your practice?
So by wellness, I look at holistic wellness. So the philosophy is, by prioritizing your holistic wellness, this will allow you to better create art for the rest of the world. So we spend a lot of time on mental health and wellness, financial wellness, and physical wellness. So making sure that our artists are getting their workouts in, they're doing their vocal training. They're also in community with therapists and therapists that are committed to their weekly meetings, as well as within our network, we have a few financial advisors that are helping our artists assess their net worth and what it could potentially grow to, and what their spend is for the year per project, per budget, so that they know how every dollar is being spent and how money is coming in from all of the different revenue streams. We want to make sure that the artists are the CEOs of their own companies, and that looks like making sure that we're as transparent with them as possible. We've made some mistakes along the way, but with those mistakes, we've learned from them, and we're in a better position to serve our musicians now more than ever.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm in the filmmaking space, but also just being a fan of music, you hear a lot about those cases where a lot of record labels might take advantage, or young artists come in and they don't know much about it. So it's cool to see that you've integrated that learning for your artists and centered that wellness too. So I think that's very cool, and that's needed in the industry. Yeah, what, I don't know if that was what drove that to be part of Spinach's mission or not, but could you talk about how you integrated that and what team you brought on to make sure that that happened?
Yeah, I think the mission sort of evolved and pivoted over the last 2 to 3 years. I think the focus was really on equitable and fair compensation, but that quickly grew to, building the underbelly, making sure the infrastructure was taken care of, making sure the whole person is taken care of. And essentially, we've been able to create an environment where artists are demanding a certain level of respect from the very beginning, from contracts to negotiating deals to striking partnerships, to cultivating joint ventures, and making sure that the artist is in the room for every one of those conversations, and we're not siloing them or hiding certain things from them. I think if we didn't have those structures in place, if we didn't put such a strong emphasis on mental health and wellness, we would be just like every other record label that is very profit driven. Our in-house therapist, Sarita Butler, is actually the same therapist to Summer Walker and Black. So we've been fortunate enough to work with her on building out that infrastructure and really seeing the fruits of our labor in real time. I think there are artists from larger labels that are now getting out of their deals and opting to come to Spinach for those resources, but more importantly, for a structure that's like not traumatizing and not triggering. So we're really excited with what we've built so far, but we're not satisfied. Are looking forward to the difficult task of making it more robust and allowing space for more artists to be a part of the community. We have a mandatory set of vacations structured throughout the year. We usually take 2-week shutdowns, one in March, another in July, October, and then December, where we just shut off. It's actually a method that I've sort of replicated from another creative and CEO. Her name is Sydney Utendahl. She created a creative collective that really is tasked with wellness, particularly from the burnout perspective and angle. So those shutdowns are designed to, like, we have a global day off every 3 to 4 weeks on Fridays. We have those 2-week shutdowns just to like manually reset. And every year that an artist releases a project, we give them 4 to 5 months sabbatical to recharge, meet with their friends and family before they come back and are sort of tasked with putting out another body of work. I think the culmination of effort and energy that it takes to put out music that's very personal and very close to the heart can be emotionally taxing. So we want to make sure that we're not treating them like commodities, treating the artists like commodities, and giving them the space that they need and the necessary time to recharge and reconnect with their therapists, reconnect with their routines, get back to the things that excite and invigorate them. And that oftentimes looks like just unplugging and recharging. We've also taken about 2 to 3 years in building a mental health plan that can be customized per artist. So there's like an intake survey where we usually ask artists on a scale of 1 to 10. This month I felt happy or satisfied with my obligations. I was able to be creative. I'm eating well, I'm sleeping well, without being super intrusive. And we usually do those surveys like once a month. And every month thereafter, over a 12-month period, we start to plot data around each artist's journey. And that will guide us as to when we should release a certain album or when we should release an EP, when we should scale back and push forward. So no two rollouts are the same. There's no clashes in artist collaboration, but we also make sure that, if an artist is really going through a tough time or there's like a family situation that's happening, we're able to make sure that we can say that we've done the legwork to, get ahead of it. If they're starting to experience bouts of depression, that's what that dot plot is for. We can start to predict a little bit of when those bouts might take place, or sleep deprivation might be taking place for 3 to 4 months at a time. That's probably not the best time to be recording music until 1 or 2 in the morning. So it's a very bespoke plan, obviously with the therapist, just to make sure that we have that clinical background. And then we also have our new team of collaborators, musicians from another studio space, Rec Room. They're a group of 5 multi-instrumentalists that work at Electric Lady Studios that have also worked with world-renowned musicians. So we've been fortunate enough to build relationships there. And they're super down to earth, highly emotionally intelligent, and don't really try to pry. They sort of meet artists where they are in their journey and, get to know them. And that's sort of where the conversations and the sessions start. From there, it can go into a full demo. It can start with just a chord progression. But I think a lot of our artists are having a lot more fun in the process of creating music, and the results are speaking for themselves.
Got you. Yeah, I love that process. And it seems like it takes a little bit of time, but that it's in the long run worth it, like better for the artists as well, and like their work. And maybe kind of like maybe shifting away from, not shifting away, but you also do a lot of other things outside of music, just personally and through Spinach. So could you talk a little bit about like your film work and like your work in fashion?
Yeah. Film has always been something that I've had an affinity for. Unfortunately, in the last 2 to 3 years, I've been able to be a part of 2 short films that are set to be released pretty soon. A lot of them are heavy narrative driven projects. Those with very well written scripts, extremely tight casts, as well as teams of people that are all extremely talented and have opened up my world of film even further. But yeah, I've been a part of a short film with director and producer John Bartley, working on Pareidolia. It's about a transportation smuggler that's being haunted by his past. We have a few folks that are shopping that film at Cannes right now. And I worked on another short film with producer, now distributor at Giant Pictures, Madeline Schumacher, and Carlos Maldonado is the director and writer of Kinetic. They're extremely talented, and I could see working with them, for the next like 5 or 10 years. They're just easy to work with, extremely gifted in their spaces, and they truly have a passion for film. And as someone that's been a consumer of film for a long time, to be on the other side and really like get to see the magic of how you can get a certain reaction from people when making these films is really interesting to me. So I've developed like a deeper appetite for wanting to make shorts, features, commercials, and that kind of ties into the fashion work as well. Funny story, I started working in fashion adjacently in 2017. I used to be a stylist. Not a lot of people know this, but I was a stylist for a few Victoria's Secret models, and I used to work with Curating. So she's the founder of We're Not Really Strangers. And from there, like we started, talking a little bit about community building, like mental health and wellness, and fashion has always been something that's part of my life, but I've never really like fully acknowledged it. In 2020, 2021, I received an email from some intern at this like Queens-based fashion house in my spam folder. And I didn't really think much of it. I thought it was a little sketchy. And I looked at the email and it was like, we really like your video work. We'd love to work with you. We're just looking to shoot like 2 models with like a drone like flying by overhead. So they gave me the location of where they needed it. We hopped on a phone call. I'm thinking like, okay, this is just quick client work. Let's assess if this is actually legitimate. Turned out to be designer LaQuan Smith. And I later realized after working on that project until 4 or 5 in the morning, he was the first African-American designer to shoot a fashion show at the top of the Empire State Building, and also the only designer that's ever successfully completed that task. So we made history in the process of working with him. And since then, we've been invited back to work on Met Gala projects, to spring, summer, and fall, winter fashion weeks. And I think developing that relationship with a director from an artist perspective kind of influences how I want to scale my collaborative projects with our artists moving forward. Since that's the largest client we've worked with, it gives me perspective into the worlds that some of our artists want to exist in and coexist in over the next 5 or 10 years. So we've established a really unique intersection. I don't know any other record labels that are in fashion in such a way as we are, who've been able to cultivate a space for the artists to capitalize off of placement of their music, placement of videos, strategically developing partnerships. We've developed a partnership with Cash App, developed a partnership with Apple, Spotify. Without that email in my spam folder, I would not be in this position. So very, very fortunate, very grateful. I can now call myself an executive producer. And the goal is to bring more musicians, more videographers and photographers through the rungs so that they can have those same experiences and take over.
Yeah, like you said, that's super unique. I think when we think of the intersection of fashion and music, it's what an artist is wearing or what designer they're with, but there can be more to that, creatively, and y'all have shown that. So I think that that's very special and very cool. And I guess also just another thing, more talking about you and your upbringing and how you got to be in fashion and music and film. Could you talk about just you were talking how you moved from you lived in Atlanta for a bit, you moved to Connecticut. I think I read somewhere that you were in Arkansas for a little bit. And yeah. So just moving around, how did you find, what was the media you consumed? How did online culture just influence your upbringing, moving around so much? And how did that potentially lead to where you are now?
Yeah, I watched a lot of Law and Order growing up. I listened to a lot of Usher. I watched the Olympics a lot growing up. So very competitive household, very much influenced by R&B and pop. I listened to a lot of Kanye West, going to school. So that creativity component was always there. But I don't think it was until middle school or high school until that creativity started to compound and explode. Just being around people who were fundamentally different than me really exposed my ears to new sounds. I started watching indie films. I think at one point I bought a movie pass and just started going to the movies 30 times a month, and just in between classes in college, I would just go to a movie theater and sit down and watch a film, even if it was for 15 or 20 minutes, just to dissect the scene. So I think those moments really have shaped the spaces that I'm in now and have made me appreciate more of the conversation that I have. But I like being a little ahead of the curve. So I go to a lot of film festivals. I like to listen to a lot of unreleased music. I'm usually staying up. I used to stay up until midnight on Thursdays for unreleased music to be released. Yeah, I would go on blogs and study what was trending on hot new hip hop or IMDb. And now I have an IMDb, which is kind of weird, but it's interesting. Yeah, I never thought you could exist multifacetedly in these spaces, but people like The Weeknd, people like Drake are breaking that mold and showing, you have the capacity to exist in all of these spaces at the same time, and it doesn't have to be overwhelming. You can have a body of work that can be appreciated in several different spaces. So there's an Emmy somewhere in the world brewing. There's definitely a few Grammys in the works. Can't say I'm like trying to go for the EGOT, the Tony, or the Oscar, but we'll see.
You never know. You never know. I actually think a lot of people that I've been talking to on this podcast are also like multi-hyphenates and are able to kind of like you pursue multiple creative passions as well. And that has been facilitated by like their social media presences or how they use social media for their audiences. Is that something that you kind of utilize as a tool too?
Yeah. I think the way that I'm using social media now is fundamentally different than how I was using it before. I think when you switch from online blog to business venture, like there's a responsibility that you have to maintain. There's a certain type of curation and audience that you're trying to reach. So I definitely have like a different angle than I did before. I'm a little more private than it used to be. But I also like showing the sides of like I'm excited to show people the sides that I allow them to see. Like a lot of people will message me out of the blue and just say, I really appreciate your tech, art, music, like intersections without me like actually saying it to them. And so like the fact that they're acknowledging it, and this is like some cerebral thing that's in my head that has now created some sort of, it's like a physical thing that exists in the world for people to like consume now, which is a very visceral thing for me to appreciate. Whereas before it was just an idea, right? And it was just like some foolish tattoo that was like on my forearm. But now like people look at it as more than just this t-shirt one-off thing. There's like a very strong, like deeply committed community that's behind this. And if I quit on this tomorrow, like there's still a community that wants to see this like product thrive, right? So just the strength of the idea now is at a point where it's self-sustaining. So it's already outliving me, right? It will exist beyond what I thought it had the capacity to do in the next couple of decades. So I'm really excited to see the artists that come through, the films that come through, the fashion projects and clients that we're going to be working with, the partnerships that come through. More importantly, just like the impacted lives that can be changed. I used to be a teacher, 5 to 10 years ago, excuse me, in both Palestine and China. And I think like that teaching component is sort of baked into the DNA of Spinach. There's always like a deeper level of work that people can come in wanting to learn. So it's nice to have like employees that are both excited about the work, but also want to like become CEOs in their own right or possibly take over the organization. Because I don't want to be the boss of other people. I'd rather work in tandem with them or co-collaborate with them. So to see it become just like this clubhouse thing to like a slightly organized structure, it was weird for me. Like I didn't want it to be too corporate too quickly, but just the dedicated, consistent teammates have been extremely helpful in getting this idea off the ground, and more importantly, hitting benchmarks of success that I didn't even know exist. We're working with um, the Weekend's record label now, doing brand partnerships and working with their creative director. We're now in community with other CEOs at other record labels. So to be seen at eye level with some of those giants is also like really interesting to me. And now it's like, it's about making larger spaces for musicians to like throw shows, curate venues, curate experiences that are unique to their identity. Like Spinach has already been realized as an idea from my perspective, but now it's like the music has to speak for itself. And the artists, as the artists grow, Spinach will grow. So I'm really excited about the talent we have and the years ahead.
And could you talk a little bit about some of the artists under Spinach and, you know, what's coming up for them too?
Yeah. So we just recently signed 2 new musicians, one Ine Nielsen and Austin Holmes. The unique thing about Ine is that she was on The Voice in 2020, worked with Kelly Clarkson, and she's got an EP that's coming out in August of 2023. She's been deeply focused on creating an introductory EP, something that's very different than what she's put out in the past, very much in the R&B space. I would compare her sound to like Alex Vaughn or Ari Lennox, all the way up to Kali Uchis. But she's definitely put in the work and the effort to see where this music can take her. She's the first artist that is also doing this full time. So I'm excited to put some extra legs behind her projects and get them off the ground, get her catalog out there for people to consume. Austin is also a Maryland-based talent by way of New York. He is more of a singer-songwriter, dancer, super talented actor, and I think has a really strong vocal range. Very much like, I would compare his talents like a Michael Jackson or Chris Brown. Could also do extremely well on Broadway. So really excited to build out his catalog, get him featured in a few blogs and articles, and just see where his creativity takes him. He's very easygoing and fun to get along with. So it's a unique journey for me. Like I'm managing these artists, but I'm also like helping them from a label perspective. So like I'm a little more involved than I normally am. But I like the pace that we're moving at, and we feel confident that the product that we have ready to send out to the world is going to be strong. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, maybe that's where that Tony will come in with Austin, with the Broadway and the dancing. Like it'll be very fun, and sounds like they're multifaceted too. Yeah. Sure. You also mentioned tech a little while ago. How does that play a role into your creative process and like what you're doing right now?
By degree, I have a background in computer science and software engineering. So while I don't code for corporate billionaires, I do build products that make sense for musicians and try to like make their lives easier. So I've been building a SaaS platform that vertically integrates all of the components that are needed for a musician to succeed. So that platform has a content calendar. It's got sessions to like book your financial advising, your therapy sessions, your physical workouts. It's got an introduction to PR. It's got your email list. It's got your website development, like basically it will have your royalties in there. It's tracking your spend, your budget. So having all of that in one place as opposed to having 40 tabs open for your musician that is constantly on the go, that will always effectively have work to do, I think is extremely important. For me, having that like engineering background is helping me like find better ways to make their lives more efficient, and yeah, kill two birds with one stone. I think they're oftentimes spread too thin, so making some of those processes shorter and in one space makes their lives easier. Things won't get lost, and so over time that platform will be shot to other record labels and other directors and producers and other musicians so that they can organize and stay focused. So yeah, another unique angle is that we have this like tech perspective. We've been able to build products for our artists that are customized and a little outside of the box, to help benefit and upstream our artists. I do like a weekly streaming analytics pool. I built like a GitHub repository that sort of tracks like streaming year over year, and then like develop a streaming strategy by country that's like targeted to like where your super fans are, and can also determine the spend of the average consumer for their. That's like a not what they're interested in, but it's like kind of what I'm interested in. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, me as like someone doing this independently, and like this my first year being in my film work, like freelance and stuff like that. I would love to know if you have any recommendations on whether it be apps or software, anything that you've seen that is like, that would be helpful in someone to manage their like career if they're doing that independently or freelance.
Yeah. Asana is really good. Airtable, Monday.com. Without Monday.com, I would be nowhere. I live and die by Milanote. I think for someone who is highly, if you're like a designer and you also like thrive off of using sticky notes and like just mind mapping, like Milanote is a very powerful tool. It's got an unlimited drive storage feature. You can store like music, files, YouTube videos, links, PDFs, Excel spreadsheets, down to Google Slides. You can create brain trees. You can map them inside of like deeper containers. I've created, my tech stack. Literally, like the entire infrastructure of Spinach is like on Milanote. So if Milanote dies, like the whole thing is going down. But yeah, without Milanote, like I don't really know what I would use. It's like the best of project management, design, and data storage altogether.
Yeah, thank you. I think right now I've been living just off of Google Drive and Notion, and I'm trying to find better ways to do a lot of project management for myself. So I appreciate those a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Notion is it's very like Lego block like, but I'm not super sure if I could use that for a long period of time. It just doesn't do it for me.
Yeah, I think I liked how customizable it was, and then I realized I was like, it's becoming a chore to keep building these pages. So I'm trying to like find a little bit one that gives me maybe less customization, and then yeah, maybe another like question just on tech. I do like music just personally, and I've been using just like GarageBand. Like I'll just like fuck around on it, and there's these drummers that you can use there, like I guess essentially AI drummers that have different sounds and styles through GarageBand. And it just like makes me think about like AI and music. And, you know, me being on TikTok, I see AI covers from artists doing other songs. How do you see AI in the industry, how it is right now? Like, what do you think about it? What are you excited for? And what are you like maybe apprehensive about?
Yeah. You know, we'll start with the applications. I think the applications of AI so far have been interesting at that. I never thought I would hear a Kanye song that Kanye didn't actually sing himself. Um, I think it will create a new revenue stream for artists to exist and put less physical stress on their bodies. If this tool can become powerful enough to, create songs that people actually like. We saw a song with The Weeknd and Drake that was AI generated that people actually liked. I also would like that song. Download it on my phone and streams if I could. So I think it creates an interesting dichotomy of what the fan economy wants versus like what the artist actually wants to put out into the world. I think there will be a unique use case where AI tools will be used for a lot of unreleased music to A/B test like what will perform well in certain markets. It might actually outlive TikTok and like Instagram Reels. I still think we're in like a sandbox mode of AI tools, specifically in the music space. Really just like trying to see what will work versus like what will actually sustain over time. We won't see like the Airbnb or Uber of AI music tools probably until like another 5 or 10 years from now. But we're on the right path. I think the implications of AI tools right now at large are bigger than the applications. There's been a lot of like scammers that are using AI on phone calls to like replicate people's voices and like scamming them out of thousands of dollars. So like if your engineer somehow happens to get a hold of your audio, he could then wire transfer like thousands of dollars out of your account. Which to me, like, I don't know, there needs to be some type of like government regulation around that before it gets a little too out of hand. So I'm all for it as long as it's like regulated correctly. But I don't think the true pioneers or applications of music AI will exist until at least like 2028. Just from what I'm seeing, it's like a little too early to be using them full force. I mean, Grimes is probably the best, most primed artist to use AI tools at the moment. But it's gonna be a domino effect of like the big three in every genre that decide to use them before like it's mass adopted by every musician, from the garage band artist all the way up to like Mike Dean or Kanye, like actually adopting these new tools.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I've had also conversations with people and they're like, yeah, AI can alleviate some of those mundane tasks perhaps, but also there's a lot of implications. So I'm wary, but I'm also like, I see like how creative it can be as well and used for good, but I can also see how it's used for bad. So I'm at the point where I'm just waiting to see what happens a little bit, but I agree. It needs to like the regulations need to come in sooner rather than not.
Yeah, for sure.
Of course, this series is called The Most Interesting People on My Timeline, but in this segment, I turn it over to my guests to put me onto something new and tell me about the most interesting people on their timeline.
There's this really cool set of friends who is an influencer on TikTok. He's also like a startup founder and a professional athlete. So just existing in those three spaces is like very niche and unique in its own way. But I think it just speaks to like how the creator economy has no bounds anymore. Like someone who previously did extremely well or is still doing well in sports can have an equally lucrative, existence on a creator platform and develop like a cult following and just develop a narrative. And that narrative can just be an engine for other business ventures effectively. So he played in the NBA, also has like 800,000, 900,000 followers on TikTok. And a lot of the narrative that he talks about is, his name is Trey Skills. A lot of the narrative that he talks about is, don't be so focused on the outcome, just focus on the journey, put one foot after the other. And the narrative is kind of like driven to like a 14 or 15-year-old version of himself. So it attracts a lot of like middle school, high school, college basketball athletes. And that narrative actually pairs well with his business venture, which is the Airbnb for fitness coaches. So they've built a platform that allows fitness coaches to rent out venues for in-person live workouts. And so they've been able to get it into startup accelerators. They've raised a bunch of venture capital, but through this like self-sustaining ecosystem of these three like points, there's always like something that's happening that just makes it interesting. I follow a lot of founders. Another one would probably be Kirby Porter. She also went to Harvard. She's like a full-time entrepreneur now in the like creator economy. So she creates content that's targeted towards athletes in terms of monetizing their name, image, likeness. And she's gone from not really like admitting that she didn't really know what she was doing at first to becoming like one of the most like followed influencers on LinkedIn. She's gotten on Boardroom, which is like a very, very powerful platform for athletes and VCs in general. Just extremely greedy, very tech savvy, extremely good at marketing. Then lastly, like I'd probably say there's a couple of like really interesting musicians that I follow that aren't signed. Her name is Willa Owen. She's based in Montreal. Has a really unique sound. We've been in some early conversations about what Spinach is, what her goals are. She released one song and it hit like 200,000 streams. So really excited to see like her growth in the space and, offer guidance and assistance where I can. And if the time is right and, we can strike a deal in the next year or so, more than happy to work with her.
But is there anything in your future and Spinach's future that's coming up that you'd like to share?
Yeah, we are in the process of striking a joint venture with Sony. So far it's going well, but it's a lot of negotiations, a lot of compromise, sacrifice. But that should be going through in the next couple of months. So when it happens, you've got the inside scoop. You're the first to know. But effectively, that gives us a larger distribution model, and allows us to have access to like more songwriters, more producers. The artists can be in more community with more artists that are higher caliber. So I'm really excited about that. And our mentor network has expanded as well. So the former CEO of Def Jam is now one of our mentors. So he's been guiding us through the trenches a little bit. Yeah, just teaching us a lot of like, so his name is Bill Stephanie. He's been teaching us a lot of the ins and outs of what to expect over the next like 4 or 5 years. So the first 3 years was like heavy on infrastructure. The next 5 years is like more marketing, more PR, more community building, more festivals, more events that people can engage with and physically touch. And he helped launch the career of Public Enemy, LL Cool J. So taking elements from like developing and building labels in the 80s, and also taking like the more technologically advanced components like AI and the mental health components, merging those two worlds together. I think it's like where my focus is for the next couple of years.
That's so exciting. And I like, congratulations on all of that that's coming up. And like, I see you put in the work. So it's really cool to like hear about the fruits of that labor and all the exciting things that are to come. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And, you know, maybe to wrap up, I know like Spinach does the triple washed playlists, and that kind of inspired me to do a playlist inspired by a lot of the people that I'm interviewing for this season. So if you have any songs that you're like, you need to put this on that playlist for the audience, you know?
Ooh, so I'm a big K Tronada fan.
Mm-hmm.
And they just released a new K Tronada and Amine released a new joint album called K Tramine. So there's a song called K&A, which is like the last song on the album. It's a very like, I think it's a Michael Jackson sample, which is really interesting. But it's very smooth, very like, it's like 9 years of co-collaboration between the two of them put together into like this like 4-minute track, and it is just like so good, from the samples to the beat pattern to Amine's rapping, like another Portland native. Like, it's very impressed with how they put that project together. I just bought like a couple bottles of wine from their merch shop, so I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I haven't listened to it yet, but I want to. I love Amine, and I saw when he came to Portland, he did a show with the symphony, and it was really cool. It was interesting because we were all like sitting down listening to him perform when we kind of wanted to be like up and like moving around a little bit, but it was a really, really cool show.
Interesting.
So I'm excited to listen to it because I haven't, because I'm like, I need to be in the headspace of like, I want to listen to it and have nothing else going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then last question is, where can people find you online? Where can people connect with you and with Spinach?
So Spinach, our website is spinach-records.com. We are on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on Spotify with our playlist Triple Wash. We will also be revamping our website over the next like 3-ish months. So if you see a new like page, don't be surprised. Yeah, my personal Instagram is number 6 algo, short for 6 algorithms. And then our Instagram is Spinach Gang. I like to keep that old account handle to kind of show like we're a community. I think like Spinach Records is the more like proper classical like name for a label, but the community is kind of like self-built. So Spinach Gang on Instagram, 6alva on my personal.
All of Brad's work is linked in the description, and you can head over to taniadoes.com/Spinach Gang for links, visuals, and bonus content. Aside from the amazing future projects that Brad mentioned in the interview, Spinach also recently signed Mary Shee to a management deal, and they will be having a show at Carnegie Hall in October. So lots of amazing things coming up for Brad and for Spinach. So follow Spinach Gang on all their platforms to see more and to keep up with them. And that brings us to the end of this episode and the end of the 3rd season. Thank you all for listening as I talk about music with some of the most interesting folks I know. There are so many more that I would have loved to talk to, but time would just not permit it. But don't worry, because I have a feeling that more musical stuff will be coming along for me to share with y'all in the future. But in the meantime, make sure to follow me, your host, on Instagram and TikTok at taniadoes, and subscribe to my YouTube channel to stay up to date on this series and on some really fun projects that I'm doing this summer. During the hiatus before next season, I'm actually going to be studying abroad for the first time ever, and as a DACA girly, y'all know that is pretty big. So I will be documenting and sharing that with y'all on my YouTube channel. And when I return, hopefully I will have some more interesting people to introduce y'all to. But until then, stay connected, stay creating beautiful things, and I'll catch y'all in the next season.